The bright side of addiction is recovery. And recovery is not just a lifestyle. For many, it's life or death. Hi, everyone. I'm Neil Scott. And if you're new to our podcast, we welcome you. If you've been here before, as we always say, welcome back. And if you are in recovery, know or love someone who is, or you simply want to know more about the recovery process, or maybe you're a bit concerned about someone you know or love who is harmfully using alcohol or any other drug, this is the podcast for you, as we carry the message of hope and the promise of recovery. And a reminder, you can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. Recent episodes have featured interviews with authors Claudia Black, J.A. Jantz, and Anne Lamott, sports agent Lee Steinberg, and Grammy Award winner Bonnie Raitt, plus conversations with everyday people in long-term recovery, sharing their story, their insight, and their path. Now, in this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, I have a chance to sit down with Jeff Hatch. Jeff is a veteran NFL offensive tackle who eventually tackled his addiction, and he continues to win one day at a time. He has an amazing story, including how his journey at one point derailed an appearance by the Vice President of the United States. Here's a quick clip from the podcast with Jeff explaining that incredible story.
What ends up happening is Mike Pence decides he's going to come speak at the treatment center I work at. About 2 years later, July of 2019. This entire time I am technically under investigation. I have not been charged with any crime. No one knows anything about anything. The morning that Mike Pence is supposed to come speak at the facility, about 30 minutes before he's supposed to get there, they walk out on stage and they say, "We're so sorry he's had to cancel the trip." Now, unbeknownst to me at the time, that is a rare occurrence, I guess. You know, if the president or vice president say they're going to be somewhere for an event, they're there.
Yeah.
So this was a story, right? So it started to get a little play in the press. They were asking Trump, why is he not there? What happened? Well, they're asking Pence, why didn't you go? We'll be able to tell you in a couple of weeks. We'll be able to tell you. Well, what I found out later was the DEA had called Air Force 2 and said, you can't go speak at that treatment center. We're about to charge one of the employees with drug trafficking, so you can't go there. And I had immediately, when he canceled, I had immediately thought to myself, it has to be because of me. Right? But of course, I'm just a narcissistic, egotistical alcoholic who has no idea what he's talking about, because when it became public, I assumed it would be in the New Hampshire paper, right? I mean, it makes sense. Well, it was on CNN because of the vice president's involvement, because I was a former NFL player, because I worked in recovery, because they could make me look like Pablo Escobar. It was in the New York Times. It was everywhere. And I torched it all. I got fired from my job. Death threats came through Facebook and random text messages. It just got really hard. And again, I don't share that because I want anyone to say, oh, that poor thing. Absolutely not. These are the consequences for my actions. I just say it so that the picture is painted clearly that it got very difficult.
My conversation with Jeff Hatch is coming up next. And we will conclude our podcast with reflections from multiple Grammy winner Adele. Our website is recoverycoasttocoast.org, and if you'd like to help us out financially or know of a foundation that might be interested in maybe underwriting part or all of our program, we would be ever so grateful. A reminder that our email address is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net, and we'd love to hear from you. Recovery Coast to Coast is supported by Sundown M Ranch, one of America's oldest, least expensive, and most successful treatment programs. They're listed in Newsweek magazine's recent list of America's top treatment providers. There are thousands of treatment programs in this country. And if you or your family are in crisis, frankly, it's overwhelming. How do you decide? By cost? By the modality? Some are inpatient treatment programs, others are outpatient, some are a combination of both. And many of them are really, really expensive. So do you go by location? Some are pretty far away. Some are fancy and look more like a resort than a place to treat a serious disease. But one thing is important. Here are some important things to consider. How long they've been in existence? Are they 12-step centered and abstinence based? How long has their staff been together? Treatment is about the people who do the treating. And at Sundown M Ranch, they check all the boxes. They have been successfully treating individuals, including adolescents and family members, for over 57 years. They are a not-for-profit program, which allows them to keep their rates low, among the lowest in the country, as a matter of fact. They also own their own land, and it's beautiful, on 30 acres near the Yakima River Canyon in central Washington, not far from Seattle. It's not fancy, but it is beautiful. Their bottom line is long-term recovery for the client. Their motto is the patient is the reason we are here. They are not focused on a financial bottom line. And they don't just treat and release, instead creating a bridge back into the family, community, and the workplace. They're not focused on filling beds, but on treating each individual with dignity, with compassion, and with the utmost confidentiality. Now, if someone you know or love is in need of treatment for addictive disease, by all means, do your research, but please consider Sundown in your search. And if you go to their website, sundown.org, you can find a lot more information, as well as photos of their facility. It's where recovery begins, sundown.org. Well, it's time for coffee and conversation. A conversation with Jeff Hatch, an offensive tackle and a third-round pick of the New York Giants back in 2002. He was the 78th overall pick, and he later played for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. His post-football years, well, they were checkered with addiction and with recovery. Here's my conversation with Jeff. Welcome back once again, Recovery Coast to Coast, America's voice for recovery. Delighted to have you with us. We are, I was going to say on the road, because every year, probably for the last 15 years, I've been going to NAATP's annual leadership conference. It has been in places like Washington, D.C., Denver, San Diego, Tampa, Florida. This time it's in Seattle, which is, of course, where I live. So I'm not taking you on the road. I'm just sharing the road with you. A guy that came from the road is Jeff Hatch. Jeff is an interesting guy. I had a chance to chat with him a little while ago. He is in recovery for the past 7 years. A former NFL player, he was with the New York Giants and the Tampa Bay Bucks, and what a story he has. First of all, Jeff, welcome, and how are things going in recovery today?
I love that you asked me today. Thank you for that. So thanks for having me. Things are going as well as I let them today.
Ah, okay. But it hasn't always been that way.
Oh, certainly not. No, definitely not. I was restless, irritable, and discontent for a long time.
Prior to your career in the NFL?
I'm a believer in the fact that I think I was born with alcoholism.
Okay. A lot of people are.
I think circumstances, exacerbated as time goes, but I think I came out of the womb restless, irritable, and discontent and maladjusted. So
how old were you when you had your first drink?
13.
13?
Mm-hmm.
What were the circumstances?
Well, the circumstances were that I had felt apart from for a very long time, from as long as I could remember. It was my freshman year of high school. I had made the varsity basketball team, so I was hanging around with the juniors and seniors. They invited me to a party, and I had seen my dad drink. Alcoholism runs in my family, but I didn't know what it was. And he had given me some sips of beers along the way, but nothing significant. But at this party, my freshman year in high school, that was the first time I drank and got drunk. And it was incredible.
What did it do for you?
Well, it did everything I wanted it to, man. It was the solution to the problem of me. We've heard it before from many a person like us, right? I mean, that is the deal, right? When we get exposed to that, I mean, for me, it was the light bulb, right? It was like, oh, this is what I've been looking for. Now, interesting caveat to me is that I was pretty clever. And so I realized at that point, I said, look, this is not a sustainable solution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this until I've achieved enough stuff and things that I like myself, and then I won't have to use it anymore.
That was Jeff's plan.
That was Jeff's plan, which seemed good for me as a 13-year-old.
Were you off to the races at that point?
I was.
Yeah.
I was, but I was always able to perform well academically, show up for church on Sunday, like all the things. I made sure I checked all the boxes. I was good at towing the line. It doesn't fall apart fast for me. It never has. Not the first time around, nor the second did it fall apart fast. It's a really slow drip into the abyss.
When did the consequences come into play?
Well, interestingly enough, I didn't face consequences outside of, I would say, the alcoholic consequences that you have to your family, to yourself, to your relationships. Those were very present the first time around. I didn't face any real third dimensional legal justice system type consequences until the second time around. So the first time, I went to college to play football.
Where'd you go?
University of Pennsylvania. And, I had only started playing football my junior year of high school.
Wow.
Yeah. I had transferred to a school to play basketball there. And I was shooting around in the gym, and the football coach came in. And at that point, I was about 6'5" and probably like 250 at 16. And he said, you're bigger than everybody at the school. We have 20 guys on the football team. Will you please play? And I said, if you ask my mom and she says it's okay, I will.
Wow.
And he did, and she said yes. And so that's what got me into that. So I say that to say, when I was deciding where or what I was going to do in college, there was opportunities to play both sports. Some schools were basketball, some schools were football. And I went to the University of Pennsylvania because, number one, it was 2 hours from where I was born in Maryland and where I was raised. My parents could come to all my games. And I sat down with that coach, a guy named Al Bagnoli, probably 5'5" Italian man. And in the recruiting process, a lot of people will just tell you, you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. You're going to come here and the red carpet's going to be rolled out every day for you. And, and I sat down with him and he goes, what are you doing playing basketball? And I was like, excuse me? He said, you've been doing that your whole life and you're pretty good, but you're not that good. He said, you've been playing football for 2 years. Why don't you come here, get a great education, and if you're good enough, they're going to find you. And I was like, okay, it made perfect sense. So that's what I did. I went there. I went to Penn and played football there, and had a great experience. I think college for me was interesting in the sense that I did this thing that I think some of us do, where I was never an aggressive or violent person. It wasn't until later in life that I really football is what brought that out of me. And so in honing that, I started to become more aggressive. And what started to happen was I would drink and I would start to get violent. And that had never been the case. So it was my junior year of college where, paddy wagon chases me the wrong way down the street. I have to hide out in the attic of my buddy's apartment because I just punched a guy in the face and now the cops are after me, and managed to skirt that. But it was that time I was like, okay, I really can't be doing this, because if I get arrested or face consequences for this, it's going to be bad for my potential.
All goes out the window.
Right.
Yeah.
So I decided, like any good alcoholic or drug addict, that I would, instead of stopping drinking, I would just mitigate the violent aggression tendencies that came out with drinking by smoking more marijuana.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Right?
Duh. Yeah. And then what happened?
Well, then my senior year of college, I am coming home from practice, and I am listening to, I remember the day I came home, and I pressed the voicemail we still had house phones. I had a phone in my room. I pressed the voicemail, and it was a message from a scout for the Washington Redskins.
Wow.
And he said, Jeff, this is so-and-so from the Redskins. We are very interested in you. We really like what we've seen on film. Keep doing what you're doing, and we'll be in touch as we get closer towards the draft. And it was like, oh my gosh, this thing could really be happening. But 3 seconds later, there was a knock at my door because I was selling a pound of marijuana out of my refrigerator, and someone was there to pick up. So that's what it looked like, And that felt totally okay in the time. Only in hindsight do I look at that and go, look at you. Here you are. The world at your footsteps, right? Like you're just ready to go, and then the potentiality of you throwing it away is right there. But I didn't yet. I was able to hold it together for a while longer. And I remember I got a call towards the end of my senior season from ESPN. They were filming the first season of a show called Hey Rookie, Welcome to the NFL. And They thought it was interesting that this is an Ivy League guy who's probably going to get drafted. That's not a common story. And do you want to be included? And of course I told them no.
Yeah, right. Sure. Right, Jeff.
Like any good egotistical alcoholic, I was like, of course I'll do this. So life got really big really fast. For me, my alcoholism responds appropriately to that and just says, like, really are that special.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And everything's great. And I ended up getting drafted by the New York Giants in the third round that year.
Tell me about that, how that came to be, and your reaction to all of that happening.
Yeah. I remember we were playing at Columbia in New York City. It was the fourth game of my senior season. Week one that season had been canceled because it was a game that took place immediately after 9/11.
Oh, boy.
And I remember when we were taking the bus into New York to play Columbia, a month later, you could still see the sky. It was still dust in the air. It was just a really wild time. I mean, you remember, it was just incredible. And I remember after that game walking off the field and a guy coming up to me in a suit and handing me a business card and saying, Jeff, my name is, so-and-so. I'm an agent and I think you got a chance to be drafted. I'd love to represent you. So if we could have a talk, that'd be great. And that had never happened before. Right? Like, shocker.
Yeah.
And from there, it was as if a fire hose got turned on. And so I struggled to process that. Imposter syndrome, I think, is very real. And I did not feel like I deserved what was coming. As a result, I think I leaned further into my substance use to mitigate that discomfort, And it was very interesting because I was not always the best player by any means on the teams I played on. So when I became that, it was interesting to watch the behavior of others change around me. That was one of the things that I was keenly aware of was, wow, it's very interesting how differently you're viewing me now that I'm this. Because I remember when I was that, you didn't even... So there was an interesting thing. And, I was grateful, and I will always be grateful. I was a first-team All-American my senior year. Got to play in an all-star game that no longer exists that was called the Blue-Gray game. They played it on Christmas Day.
I remember that, sure.
Yeah. And so I remember going down to that, and that was the first time I ever lined up against anyone not with a Harvard or Dartmouth helmet on.
I hear you.
Here were these guys from Notre Dame and North Carolina, and I'm like, oh my gracious. They looked at my helmet and they go, what school is that?
Yeah. You playing left tackle?
Yes. Yeah. And, I played well there and felt really good about that and hired an agent, and he sent me to train at a little speed and strength school to get ready for the 40 and the pro day stuff. I did not get invited to the combine, but I remember my pro day at Penn, 30 of 32 teams were there.
Wow.
It was a big showing, and I performed well. And, very interesting time. You ask me that question, and I think back to it, and I think that I was proud. I felt like I was an imposter. I felt excited, incredibly nervous. I mean, it's just everything is, the volume is turned up on every emotion when you're in the midst of that thing, and particularly for me, right? Like, I didn't have anyone around me who had ever experienced anything like that, There was one other guy at Penn that had been drafted as Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick in the draft 3 years prior.
Oh.
Yeah, but he was the only one that I even knew. Yeah. And so I didn't have anyone to bounce off of what was happening. My relationship with honesty, my capacity to be honest with myself and with you, continues to evolve the longer I stay actively engaged in the daily disciplines of my recovery.
Very well put.
Right? Like, it's not just a matter of being sober for an extended period of time. It's a matter of actually doing the thing. And through the doing of the thing, I get more capable of being comfortable in my own skin. And so what I'll tell you now is that my back injury actually occurred while I was training for the draft. My agent said, here's the deal. We disclose, you don't get drafted, you pay for the back surgery, and maybe you get signed as a free agent.
Or
you take some painkillers, you suck it up, you take it as far as you can, and if you can make it through your rookie year, great, and then you get the surgery. If not, you raise the white flag when you have to, and by that point, they're going to have invested in you enough that... And so that's what we did. But that was the first time I remember on such a big scale feeling like I was being actually fraudulent.
And manipulated.
Truth.
Yeah.
From my own personal spot in that situation that I was looking at, like, man, I've got this huge lie that I'm carrying now. And I'd really never felt that way in my life before, and it was really heavy. And so I get drafted.
Take me to the draft day and the phone call.
Wow. Well, what's interesting is it's on screen. I mean, there was not only the Hey Rookie people, but there was another documentary that was being made by CNNSI. They had created a TV channel. It was called Goal to Go, and it was following me from the end of my senior season through the draft. So I was at my house with my family, my best friend, my sister, and 2 camera crews. And the draft started, and we didn't know. I was kind of slated to go somewhere between the 2nd and 5th round, and it could have been anywhere in between. So that was a long day, and I remember the phone ringing, and the Giants coach at the time was Jim Fossil, and it was Coach Fossil, and he said, "Jeff," I said, "Yes." He said, "We're going to take you with the next pick. Congratulations, you're a New York Giant."
Wow.
And it was like an incredible thing. I have put that piece of my life in its right place. Okay, I am not a guy who walks around and will tell you that I played in the NFL. You're going to have to ask me questions, right? I just not.
Right.
But even talking to you now, I got drafted in 2002, so it's 23 years later. I can still feel a little chill on my neck when I say that to you, remembering what that felt like, because it was a really cool thing.
Yeah. Were you sober at the time?
No, definitely not. As a matter of fact, I was telling somebody earlier, when I watch that documentary footage, you see me, I'm asleep on the couch during the day while the draft's on, and I'm not asleep because I'm tired.
Oh.
Right? You know, really interesting to watch that stuff and see that. And, you know, because what I do think sometimes is in the midst of active addiction, there are things happening that you're just unaware of. I just wasn't fully present for it because of my substance use disorder.
Yeah. Take me into that first year in the NFL, your rookie year. I assume the drinking and the using continued, and also the pain in your back continued. You were still hiding that as well. You were in denial over 2 things, or hiding 2 things.
Yeah. Well, I ended up very early in the season. I think we might have still been in camp where my back just went, and I had to finally raise the flag and say, "Hey, something's going on." By that point, I couldn't even bend over and tie my shoes anymore. I mean, people were asking questions anyways. They were like, why can't, you know, it was so bad. And so I was already on painkillers. I got surgery my rookie year, my first surgery. I got a discectomy and was put on injured reserve. And I remember that really, really sent my disease into high gear. There were 2 things that happened that were impactful in my rookie year. The first thing was I signed my contract, and I remember I came home from practice and I sat down and I had my list. Okay, these are the things that are going to happen. And when I've done these things, I won't hate myself anymore. I had graduated from an Ivy League school with a triple major. I had won the President's Award for Community Service. I had been a first-team All-American, drafted in the NFL, signed my $1 million contract, all the things, and I still hated myself. And I didn't know that I had alcoholism yet. So I was so confused and sad because it made no sense to me. And I just remember that moment being like, oh no, now what? I didn't know. So that again, I didn't know what I had. I didn't know what I was dealing with. It was just a confusing time. And then I think also when you get put on injured reserve in the NFL, you don't really spend a ton of time around the guys because there's some kind of voodoo magic that you kind of think about. If I'm not hurt, I don't want the hurt guys around because they're going to get their muck on me.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like hide you away until you're healthy enough to get back out. And so that hiding away from me, what a wonderful recipe for an alcoholic, right?
Sure.
Now I'm alone in my place, access to whatever I want, however much I want. And, my disease just went. I was off to the races the worst way.
Did you get traded to Tampa Bay?
No, I got cut by the Giants. My second year I come back. I, to be frank, was never the same player. But I made it back, and I ended up starting in my second year. After that season, Fossil gets fired, and they hire Tom Coughlin. And Coughlin comes into town, and you're chuckling because he was a disciplinarian.
Yeah, I've had some run-ins with him, yeah.
Yeah, so he wanted us to march to practice, and I was not up for that. And so I just didn't report. And so they're like, okay, Mr. Big Shot.
See ya.
Bye. And so that's when I got picked up. Initially, I got signed by the Rams, actually. I flew into St. Louis to do my physical. They signed me sight unseen. I failed my physical because of my back, because they could tell. So then I got signed by Tampa. And when I went to Tampa, I was smart enough to take 5 Percocet before I did my physical, because they were going to ask me to bend over and touch my toes, and I knew the only way I'd be able to do that, is if I was not feeling it. So I got through and got signed by the Bucs. My back was already, it was bad. And it ended up going out that year, and I had to get a spinal fusion. So that was it.
So you had 4 years in the league. Tell me about entering into recovery. How did that happen? When did it happen? And why did it happen?
It's a really good question. And I have to give credit to the NFL substance abuse program, okay? Because what had happened was I had gotten, shocking, I was in it because I had gotten a positive marijuana test. And so as a result of that, I had to go see a league-appointed psychiatrist once a week, and then I would get random drug screens. The physician that I was seeing for that program was a woman named Dr. Martha Brown. Now, Dr. Martha Brown was in Tampa, Florida, and she saw the Yankees, the Bucs, she was the pro athlete. I was seeing her in the midst of, that was the only time I was leaving my apartment, was my once a week appointment with her. It was at the end here. Now I'm in a position where what starts to happen for me, it was not the first time this happened, but I would go into a store and one of the clerks would come up to me and say, "Hey, are you okay?" And I would say, "I'm fine. What do you mean? You were in here yesterday and you were not okay." You stood and looked at that wall for about 15 minutes and we didn't know if you were okay or not. And I had no recollection of that, right? So it was like things like that were happening, right? And what ended up happening was I overdosed. And I ended up in Tampa General Hospital. And Dr. Martha Brown came and saw me. And she said, "You need to get help." And I said, "No, I don't." Because that's what we do. So they let me sit there. And I think it was the third day I was in that hospital, the Super Bowl came on. And I was laying there, coming off an overdose, watching the Super Bowl. And it just hit me that 4 years earlier, I figured maybe one day I'd be playing in that game. And here I am, 4 years later, I'll never play football again. And I just overdosed. And this is not a good situation.
Reality check.
Seriously. So that was what got me willing to go to treatment for 2 weeks. I was going to go for 2 weeks.
Where'd you go?
I went to a place in Louisiana called Palmetto.
Oh, I'm familiar with that, sure.
Sure. Really solid program.
Yeah.
Dr. Martha Brown had previously run the Louisiana Physicians Health Program. So she knew of this really good program for narcissists in North Louisiana. Figured they might have a bed for me, which they did. Yeah. So that's what got me there.
What was that treatment experience like for you?
I had an impression in my mind of what I thought treatment was. And it looked a lot like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That's just what I thought. I didn't know, and so I thought that's what I was walking into. And I remember when I got there, well, the first thing that happens is I knew I was in Louisiana because I got out of the van and one of the patients saw me get out of the van. He goes, "Great, googly moogly, look at the size of that guy." And I was like, oh my gosh, where have I come for treatment? But what happened very quickly was I started talking to some of the other patients. I saw right away that they were people like me. And there's some magical thing that exists between alcoholics where we don't necessarily even have to say a word to each other.
How long did your recovery last after that treatment? Because I know you said you did have a relapse along the way.
About 8 years.
Wow.
Yeah, about 8 years. Shocking story, like no one's ever heard this before, but when I completed treatment there, I stayed 104 days in treatment, and they said, we want you to move into the halfway house, and I said, okay, because I didn't really have anything to go back to in Tampa. I had an apartment that I was paying for, but there was no life there for me anymore. I was done with playing. And they said, you move into this halfway house, you got to get a job. And so I went and got a job at the movie gallery, which was a little chain movie store, as a customer service associate. And so when I have sponsees now tell me, I don't want to take that job, I'm better than that.
Yeah.
And let me tell you something, bro. Here's my resume. Left tackle for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to customer service associate at the movie gallery in Rayville, Louisiana, okay? And it was great. I really fell in love. I realized in the midst of that early recovery, the lights had come back on in me enough that I realized, oh, I love people. I loved it when customers would come in. I get to talk to them, trying to, rent them the Little Mermaid. It's just I found a joy for living again. And in no time, the treatment center said, "Well, why don't you come do marketing for us because you like people?" And I didn't have any plans. So I said, absolutely, I'll do that. And have really basically been in or around the treatment industry for the better part of the last 18 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
What happened 8 years out?
8 years out. About 5 years out, I left Louisiana. and moved out to Los Angeles to go to graduate school. In the midst of that, started doing some acting and stunt work. There's not a lot of big guys that want to get punched in the face by Wonder Woman, and I was totally okay with it, so I started doing some work in that regard. And I ended up hurting my knee pretty bad, and I had to get a total knee replacement. And so I was like any good, alcoholic drug addict, I was scared to death about getting surgery. So I went back to Maryland, where I'm from, to do that surgery. And luckily, if you're a vested veteran, the NFL will pay for total knees and hips. So they were covering the surgery. So I went back there to do it, and it was... when I clicked that button, when I woke up from that surgery, and I felt those opiates in my bloodstream again, I was
back.
Yeah. And here's the thing about it that I say now that I try to express to people. The relapse had started long before that. And the relapse had started when I started creating distance between myself and the fellowship. I had stopped going to meetings as regularly, and I was doing it subconsciously, right? It wasn't like I was thinking about it, but what I was doing was creating enough distance that you guys wouldn't ask me questions. And so when I relapsed, when I clicked that button, when I felt that feeling again, I didn't call the guy who was my sponsor in name only and say, hey, this happened. I didn't say anything to anybody. And that is really the thing. Like the feeling's not the thing at first, right? It's like, just because you wake up and click a button after surgery and you feel the feeling of like, oh my gosh, I like this, that doesn't mean that it's not telling anyone about it. It's hiding it that really is what gets me sick.
How long were you out?
About 4 years.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Again, like I said, I don't burn it quick.
Wow.
Right. So I managed to get them to prescribe me fentanyl patches. And so I took a job back in the industry, in the treatment industry, for a place up in New Hampshire. I'm completely justifying my behavior because I'm doing these patches as they're prescribed.
As prescribed.
I have a total knee replacement and a spinal fusion. I played in the NFL. I did stunts. Nobody understands my chronic pain. And then the best part is the end, where I really throw myself as the martyr down and I say, I'm doing this so that I can be available to help others. And it's like, ugh. But that's like the cherry on top of the relapse lie.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. How'd you get back on board?
I ended up with a federal felony.
Whoa.
So after about 2 years of driving 16 hours round trip to fill the prescription back in Maryland once a month, I figured it'd be a lot easier to walk out the door and buy some heroin because it's an opiate. It'll do the same thing. Yeah. And that happened. And then within no time, I was spending my entire paycheck at the dope dealers. And so when that dope dealer says, hey man, if you'll drive down the highway 4 exits and pick up my load and bring it back to me, I'll give you your personal use amount for free. That sounds like a good idea. And now I'm the mule. Wow. Neil, I am sitting on panels with the governor of New Hampshire and senators talking about prevention and recovery, and I'm doing lines of heroin in the parking lot before I go in. I think that people who aren't like us, and I know this because I experienced it, that sounds like an evil person. And I express to people, and people like you will get it, but people that don't have what we have don't get it. There was never a moment in that where I was doing anything but surviving. I'm going from one day to the next, making sure I have what I need because I need this as much as I need air. And that's as far as it goes for me. I'm never, it was nothing more than that.
One day at a time in the other direction.
Boom. Well said. Yeah. So what ends up happening is I bring a load back. The guy comes and picks it up and leaves. And I get a call 30 minutes later that he got arrested when he walked out of my apartment. And I need to get out of there. So that was in July of 2017. I, at that point, tried to break away, but, I was trying to hold it together. I had no solution. So I fought, and finally, after about a month and a half, I remember the date. It was September 17th of 2017. I drove down to Lawrence, Massachusetts, and I picked up 20 grams of heroin, which was they had, on the East Coast, they have these things called fingers. So it's a 10-gram sleeve that's about the size of a finger. I bought 2 of those and I crossed back over into New Hampshire, and it was interesting. I crossed over and I saw an unmarked police car in the center of the highway, and I thought, that's weird. My spidey senses were aware of something. And so I pulled off the main highway and started taking the back road home, and then the next thing you know, there's 2 New Hampshire State Police patrols behind me with their lights on, and they pulled me over, and I was like, oh no. And so, like any good drug addict, I immediately swallowed one of those 10-gram fingers of heroin, and the other one I again, like any good drug addict, left in the center console for them to find. So they immediately pulled me out of the car and found it. And then that unmarked car pulled up and put his window down. And he said, "Mr. Hatch, we know everything you've been involved in, and we'd like you to come talk to us."
Wow.
And it was like, there are moments where no matter how inebriated I am, reality will pierce the veil. That was one of those moments.
My goodness.
And so I ended up, they took me to some kind of like secret barracks and basically let me know that somebody else had flipped a long time ago, and they'd been following all of us, and they'd arrested this guy, and they really didn't care about me that much, but they wouldn't prosecute me if I'd cooperate.
Let's make a deal.
And that sounded really good to me at the time, because the guy that I knew had already been arrested.
Yeah.
And if it's going to keep me from facing consequences, I'm in, right? And right about then, that heroin starts melting in my belly, and I start to pass out. And so they say, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take you home. You can sleep it off, and we'll come see you tomorrow." And sure enough, I ride in a patrol car. Another guy drives my vehicle back to my apartment complex. They park my car. They walk me up to my apartment, and that's it. And I woke up the next morning, September 18th of 2017, which is my sobriety date, to a knock at the door. That was not a friendly knock. Some of you who are listening will have heard this knock. And when I answered the door, it was the FBI, the DEA, and the New Hampshire State Police.
Oof.
And by the end of that meeting, the stipulations were you don't tell anyone what's going on, you don't change anything in your life, and you don't drink and you don't drug. Any of those three things trigger immediate arrest, and we'll be in touch. And there I am.
An offer you can't refuse?
An offer you can't refuse. And, they leave, and then I'm there in my apartment.
What do you do?
I mean, well, what I did was I looked at the potential outcomes. And one was, because this was my first day sober again, really. And now I'm absolutely walloped with the fact that I have been engaging in this behavior and doing the things I've been doing. The amount of shame and guilt I felt, and fear, all the things was monstrous. And so I wrote the note. I got a box cutter, I put it under the sink in my bathroom, I wrote my notes, and I said, if this comes to it, that's what I'm going to do. Because I don't know that I'm going to be able to walk through this. But I had recovery before. And in that time, I had experienced some of the freedom that had come with Step 11. Prayer and meditation had been fruitful for me. And I thought to myself, I can't talk about this with anybody. I can't share this. But maybe if I can find enough connection to God, I can walk through it. Maybe. And so for the first time really in my life, I attacked prayer and meditation. I mean, I went for it. And I'll tell you something, it wasn't fast, but what came was that freedom from the bondage of self that gets talked about. I found something inside that the connection with the fourth dimension was more important than the third dimension. And so that whatever was going to happen in this third dimension was not going to be able to penetrate the relationship I was developing with my higher power. And that was going to carry me. And I knew that. And that was the first time I'd ever gone deep enough that I felt it so hard and strong that I was okay. No matter what, I was okay. And that was, I will forever be grateful for everything that happened in that relapse for that. Because it carries me every day now.
Do you start going to meetings right away?
Not right away. What ends up happening is Mike Pence decides he's going to come speak at the treatment center I work at. About 2 years later, July of 2019. This entire time I am technically under investigation. I have not been charged with any crime. No one knows anything about anything. I am now a year and a half into a relationship with a woman who knows nothing about it. And the morning that Mike Pence is supposed to come speak at the facility, about 30 minutes before he's supposed to get there, they walk out on stage and they say, "We're so sorry he's had to cancel the trip." Now, unbeknownst to me at the time, that is a rare occurrence, I guess. If the president or vice president say they're going to be somewhere for an event, they're there.
Yeah.
So this was a story, right? So it started to get a little play in the press. They were asking Trump, why is he not there? What happened? Well, they're asking Pence, why didn't you go? We'll be able to tell you in a couple of weeks. We'll be able to tell you. Well, what I found out later was the DEA had called Air Force 2 and said, you can't go speak at that treatment center. We're about to charge one of the employees with drug trafficking, so you can't go there.
Wow.
So when I was charged 2 weeks later, July 23rd, I think it was, I got a call in the morning from my attorney. And I had immediately, when he canceled, I had immediately thought to myself, it has to be because of me, right? But of course, I'm just a narcissistic, egotistical alcoholic who has no idea what he's talking about. And I called my attorney, and he was like, there's no way. And actually, the detective for the state police who had led the investigation into me ended up becoming my closest confidant. Because he told me about a month into us being in communication, he said, Jeff, when I investigated you, I thought you were probably the biggest POS walking. But I've gotten to know you, and you've explained this thing you have to me, and I get it. And he became, he's still, we're very close friends today.
Wow.
He just got his doctorate. It's really awesome. So I called him and I said, Steve, do you think? He said, no way. There's no way. Well, it was that. And so when I got charged 2 weeks later, I get the call. They're going to charge you. They're going to charge you with a federal felony. They're going to charge you with using a phone in commission of a drug crime, which is about the most, I knew at that point I didn't have to keep the secret anymore.
Yeah.
And so I brought my boss in, and I had a very awkward conversation where I said, look, I've been sober again for almost 2 years, but I am now facing some serious consequences as a result of the behaviors during that relapse. And I'm being charged with a federal felony today. And that was a tough conversation. And then I had to go home and sit my girlfriend of a year and a half down on the couch and say, I need to tell you something. And at the time, I told myself that I would be okay no matter what the consequences were. In hindsight, I am so incredibly grateful that she said she would stay. Her rationale was that she did not know the man who engaged in those behaviors. I'd been sober the entire time we were together. We'd been living together for a long time at that point, a little over a year of our relationship. She's also in long-term recovery, and she said she would stay, and support me. And I just can't express to you how much that meant.
Yeah.
Because when it became public, I assumed it would be in the New Hampshire paper, right? It makes sense. Well, it was on CNN. Because of the vice president's involvement, because I was a former NFL player, because I worked in recovery, because they could make me look like Pablo Escobar, it was in the New York Times, it was everywhere. And life, I torched it all. I got fired from my job. I had a company car, that was gone. Company phone, that was gone. The guy who mowed our lawn said he was not going to mow our lawn anymore. Death threats came through Facebook and random text messages. It just got really hard. And again, I don't share that because I want anyone to say, oh, that poor thing. Absolutely not. These are the consequences for my actions. I just say it so that the picture is painted clearly that it got very difficult.
What was the sentence?
Well, I didn't end up getting sentenced until 4.5 years into recovery again, because COVID happened.
Yeah. Oh.
So everything got put on ice. And so I tell people that now. I share my story. I say, look, let me tell you something. You want to talk about the discipline of engaging in the present moment. I learned that because for 4.5 years, the first thing that I thought about when I woke up in the morning and the last thing I thought about before I went to bed was, am I going to federal prison today? That taught me the discipline of looking at my feet and going, where am I right now? And how can I be useful and helpful in this moment? And so I ended up getting sentenced in 2022. Again, to my benefit, I was 4.5 years sober again. To my benefit, I had a bunch of letters of support, and I ended up only getting 3 years probation. I did not have to go to prison.
Wow.
Huge relief. And actually, the DAs went to bat for me with the judge. He was not necessarily supportive of that, but the district attorneys actually supported me and said, look, this is a guy that we would not have even charged left to our own volition. He's been sober again. He works in treatment. He's does the right thing. There's no value add in sending this guy to prison, and he heard him. And so that was wonderful. I had proposed by that point, and we were wanting to get married and build our life, have a child, all these things. And they'd been really put on hold because we didn't know what was going to happen. So from there, I was on federal probation, which is fine. That means you're on paper. You have to tell them where you're going, what you're doing. You have to get drug tested. I did not mind any of that. I was fine. To backtrack, you asked about meetings. Mm-hmm. When it became public, I immediately got a new sponsor.
Not in name only.
Correct. Matter of fact, it was funny. I called him at a recommendation of someone. I called him, and he said, oh, boy, you're that guy. He said, why don't you come down and meet me and let's take a walk and talk and we'll see how if we can work together. And he took me on, and he's still my sponsor today. I love him dearly. That was great. And then another really cool thing happened. I was scared to death to walk into the rooms again. And my girlfriend called a group of our friends who were also in recovery, and we all went to that first meeting together. And when I walked in, they were surrounding me. They carried me in.
Beautiful.
Oh my gosh.
Beautiful.
It's just the power of this thing. You know, it was just unbelievable. And so we got married. We are expecting our first child in August.
Oh, man. The miracles.
Man, and life is really, really good. You know, I'm gainfully employed. We own a home.
Where are you living now?
We live in Vancouver, Washington. My probation was ended a year and a half early because why would they, they just were like, there's no reason. God willing, I make it to September, I'll be 8 years sober again. Sometimes I think it's a misnomer to share the life stuff and misconstrue that as the miracles and promises, right? Because the promises are spiritual in nature, right?
Yeah.
And the freedom for me now, the thing I would say above anything else is, Neil, when I go to bed at night and I lay my head down, I fall asleep. And it feels really, really good.
And different.
Oh my gosh.
What does recovery mean to you today, Jeff?
Today, recovery means engaging in the disciplines that are expressed to me through the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous in such a way that I am living in a space of centered awareness so that when the person comes up who needs me to be useful and helpful to them, I am available to do so. Now, that's a long-winded answer, and there probably are simpler ones than that, but that's what it means to me. It means today I live my life for others. I do my best to be the best version of myself so that I can be there when the hand reaches out that needs to be held.
And there's a lot of hands that need to be held, an awful lot. I appreciate your story. I always say the bright side of addiction is recovery. You embody that, sir.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jeff Hatch. Today, he's recovering out loud, grateful and proud. By the way, I want to remind listeners of this podcast, if you'd like to tell your story of recovery, regardless of the path that you've chosen, and as long as you've been in continuous recovery for 1 year or more, drop us a note at recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Now, coming up next, multiple Grammy winner Adele, talking about the end of her career. No, not her singing career, her drinking career. She proclaims, if you're not feeling everything, you're missing everything. I love it. We'll hear from Adele in just 60 seconds.
She has always been your baby, but when your daughter got into drugs and alcohol, she turned into a stranger. What do? Where do you turn? Contact Sundown M Ranch. Sundown's nationally recognized youth treatment program guides young people back to a life free of drugs and alcohol. All treatment is gender specific and directed by caring certified professionals in a safe environment. You can get your daughter back and get to know her again. Go to www.sundown.org to learn more.
And now, as promised, let's hear from multiple Grammy Award winner Adele.
I stopped drinking. That's one great way of really sort of getting to know yourself, is being, just drinking water and being sober as anything. Well, when I was going through everything a couple of years, when I was going through my divorce, yes. Not at the beginning. At first, I think I probably kept the alcohol industry alive. But, once I realised that I had a lot of work to do on myself, I stopped drinking and I started working out lots and stuff like that to keep me sort of centred while on my journey. Was if you're not feeling everything, you're missing everything. That sort of gave me permission to really do that during the process, and not be upset.
That wraps up this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, a national podcast. If you've enjoyed our podcast, please share it with at least one other person. You can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. And if you'd like to get in touch, I'd love to hear from you. Our email is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Also, please hit the subscribe or follow button, free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. And by the way, if you missed my interview with the Addiction and Recovery eBulletin, I will post it one more time in the podcast notes. If you're considering treatment for a friend or a loved one, be sure and visit NAATP.org/AID, AID. It stands for the Addiction Information Directory, a list of those treatment programs that adhere to the strict ethical guidelines. One of them is Sundown M Ranch, but there are thousands of other good treatment programs around as well. Join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. And another shout out to our sponsoring organization, the good folks at Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins. Sundown.org. I'm Neil Scott, reminding you to stay healthy, live in gratitude, and be kind to others. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.